Hey everyone, take a closer look at this Susan B. Anthony dollar, because one small detail could explain why collectors treat some examples very differently from the rest. Let's examine what makes this coin worth a second look. First coin. The 1979 Susan B. Anthony dollar can look almost ordinary at first glance, but one small detail on the coin can completely change the way collectors approach it. The San Francisco Mint produced this dollar in both circulation and proof formats, and the proof issue contains a particularly important distinction that is easy to overlook unless you know exactly where to look. Later in this story, we will examine what authenticated examples have actually brought at auction, why some pieces remain close to face value while others move into the hundreds or even thousands of dollars, and which combination of variety, preservation, strike quality, authentication, and collector demand creates that difference. The key is understanding that the date and the S alone do not make a coin rare. On this issue, the real story begins with identifying exactly what kind of 1979 dollar you have. The timing of this coin's arrival in American commerce is part of what makes it so historically interesting. The Susan B. Anthony dollar was authorized by Public Law 95-447 and became the first U.S. circulating coin to portray a real, non-mythical woman. It replaced the much larger Eisenhower dollar, but the Mint was attempting something very different, a smaller dollar that would be easier to handle and potentially more convenient for everyday transactions. Susan B. Anthony was an especially meaningful choice because she had spent decades advocating for women's rights and voting rights, becoming one of the most recognizable figures in the American suffrage movement. By the late 1970s, the United States was dealing with inflation, changing consumer habits, and a growing interest in making coinage more practical, yet the dollar bill remained deeply established in everyday life. The new coin, therefore, entered a marketplace where it had to compete not only with other denominations, but with paper currency itself. Its physical design reveals another important part of that experiment. Frank Gasparro, the U.S. Mint's chief engraver, designed the coin with a right-facing portrait of Anthony on the obverse, surrounded by liberty and 13 stars, with "In God We Trust" beside her portrait and the date below. The reverse carries an American eagle descending toward the lunar surface, an adaptation of the Apollo 11 insignia that had already appeared on the Eisenhower dollar. Gasparro originally considered other concepts, but the legislation ultimately preserved the basic Apollo-themed reverse. The coin measures 26.5 millimeters across, weighs 8.1 grams, and has a reeded edge. Its metal is not silver. It consists of a copper-nickel outer layer bonded to a pure copper core, giving it a net composition of about 91.67% copper and 8.33% nickel. The design also incorporated an 11-sided inner outline intended to help distinguish the smaller dollar from the quarter, although the overall round shape and similar metallic appearance ultimately contributed to confusion in everyday use. That distinction between appearance and actual production becomes critical when examining the 1979 issue. San Francisco struck approximately 109,576,000 business strike Susan B. Anthony dollars in 1979, an enormous number that immediately tells us the ordinary circulation version is not a rare coin simply because it carries an S mint mark. These coins were intended for commerce, and many were preserved because the denomination never achieved the level of public acceptance the government had hoped for. The dollar's size was only slightly larger than a quarter, and consumers frequently confused the two denominations. That problem, combined with the continued availability of the $1 Federal Reserve note, limited the coin's usefulness in everyday transactions. In fact, the Anthony dollar became something of an unusual modern example of a coin that was produced in very large quantities, but never became a dominant part of American pocket change. Today, an ordinary circulated 1979 business strike will generally not command anything close to a four-figure price. Its value comes from condition, certification, and exceptional quality rather than simply surviving from 1979. Then comes the part of the 1979 story that serious collectors pay much closer attention to, the proof dollar. San Francisco produced 3,677,175 proof Susan B. Anthony dollars that year, and these were specially prepared coins intended for collectors rather than ordinary circulation. Proof production involves specially prepared dies and planchets, multiple strikes, and carefully controlled surfaces designed to produce sharp details and contrasting fields. But the most famous feature of the 1979 S proof is not the mirror finish. It is the S mint mark. Two major varieties are recognized. Type 1 is commonly called the filled S because the mint mark appears thick, somewhat rounded, and less clearly defined. Type 2 is known as the clear S because the letter is more sharply formed, and its internal openings are much easier to see. The difference resulted from a change in the mint mark punch during production, making this one of those fascinating cases where a tiny manufacturing detail created a major collecting distinction. The Type 2 proof is where rarity becomes much more meaningful. The Mint did not publish an exact breakdown showing how many of the 3,677,175 proofs were Type 1 and how many were Type 2, so collectors should be cautious whenever they see an advertisement claiming an exact population figure. Numismatic research has estimated that Type 2 pieces represented a much smaller portion of the proof production, with some estimates placing the number in the several hundred thousand range. PCGS describes the 1979 S-Type 2 proof as one of the scarcest and most valuable varieties in the Susan B. Anthony series. That does not mean every clear S is automatically worth thousands, because grade still matters enormously. A lightly handled or impaired proof can be worth dramatically less than a flawless certified specimen. The difference between PR67, PR68, PR69, and PR70 can become financially significant because proof coins are judged primarily by preservation, surface quality, contrast, and the absence of distracting imperfections. A collector examining a suspected Type 2 should therefore first determine whether the coin is actually a proof before assigning any premium to the mint mark. Auction history shows just how sharply that distinction can affect the market. PCGS records a $1,955 auction result for a 1979 S-Type 2 proof graded PR70, sold by Heritage Auctions in 2007. For comparison, the PCGS record for a Type 1 proof in PR70 is $719, demonstrating that even when two coins share the same date, mint mark, denomination, and top numerical grade, the recognized variety can influence collector demand. These are not prices that should be applied automatically to every 1979 S dollar. They represent specific certified coins, specific grades, and specific auction circumstances. On the circulation side, the picture is completely different. Great Collections reports sales of 1979 S business strikes ranging from low amounts for ordinary pieces to several $1,000s for exceptional certified examples, including a PCGS MS68 example that realized more than $5,000. That kind of result is an extreme condition rarity, not evidence that a typical 1979 S found in circulation is secretly worth thousands. Condition is therefore the next piece of the puzzle, and this is where inexperienced evaluations often go wrong. A coin can look shiny and still grade poorly because brightness is not the same thing as preservation. On an uncirculated 1979 S business strike, collectors examine the cheek and neck of Anthony, the open fields around the portrait, the high points of the eagle and lunar design, the rim, and the overall presence of contact marks. A coin that retains original mint luster but has numerous abrasions may remain in a lower mint state grade, while a cleaner example with a strong strike can move considerably higher. Proofs are judged differently because their mirrored fields can reveal even tiny hairlines, haze, spots, or handling marks. Cameo and deep cameo, or ultra cameo depending on the grading service, describe the contrast between frosted design elements and reflective fields and can add desirability when the contrast is strong. Unlike copper cents, Susan B. Anthony dollars are not normally assigned the familiar red, red-brown, or brown color designations. Tunning and surface appearance may influence eye appeal, but they are not substitutes for an actual grade. The next step is learning to separate a legitimate variety or mint error from damage on a genuine 1979 S proof. The Type 1 and Type 2 distinction is concentrated in the shape and clarity of the S mint mark. It is not simply a matter of one coin having a larger letter than another. The Business Strike 1979 S does not have the same recognized Type 1 versus Type 2 proof classification. Collectors should also watch for genuine mint errors such as major off-center strikes, dramatic clipped planchets, die breaks, or other abnormalities that can be authenticated as products of the minting process. But scratches, gouges, polishing, altered surfaces, plating, artificial tunning, and post-mint damage can imitate something unusual without adding meaningful numismatic value. Authentication begins with the basics. Verify the 8.1 gram specifications within appropriate tolerance, check the 26.5 mm diameter, inspect the reeded edge, confirm the correct copper-nickel clad construction, and compare the lettering and mint mark with trusted references. A precision scale, calipers, and a good loupe can identify warning signs, but they cannot replace professional authentication when substantial money is involved. That is particularly important because the 1979 S. Susan B. Anthony dollar has become a target for confusion, altered coins, and exaggerated online claims. Some sellers describe ordinary examples as rare simply because they are from San Francisco, while others incorrectly apply the famous Type 2 designation to circulation strikes. There are also coins that have been cleaned, polished, gold-plated, artificially toned, or otherwise modified after leaving the mint, and those alterations can destroy the originality that collectors value. If a coin appears unusually valuable, the safest approach is to avoid cleaning it, avoid abrasive materials, and avoid testing it with methods that could scratch or chemically alter the surface. Store it in an inert, archival quality holder away from PVC, excessive humidity, heat, and rapid environmental changes. For a potentially significant Type 2 proof, an important error, or an exceptionally high-grade business strike, professional grading from a recognized third-party service can establish authenticity, variety, grade, and a documented chain of identification. The cost of certification is usually easier to justify when the potential numismatic premium is substantial. And that brings the 1979 S. Susan B. Anthony dollar back to the question that makes this coin so fascinating. What actually makes one valuable? The answer is not the year alone, not the S alone, and certainly not the fact that the coin is almost half a century old. An ordinary circulated business strike can remain essentially a $1 coin, while a beautifully preserved mint state example may attract a stronger collector premium, and an exceptionally rare high-grade specimen can enter four-figure territory. A hypothetical certified piece in an unusually high grade might bring $1,240 or $2,680 if several collectors compete for it, while a truly exceptional example could move higher depending on certification and market conditions. For the proof issue, the Type 2 Clear S is the crucial variety, and a top-grade authenticated example has already demonstrated a documented $1,955 auction result. The broader lesson is more important than any single number. Rarity must be verified, condition must be measured, and market value must be based on comparable authenticated sales rather than an optimistic internet listing. The 1979 S. Susan B. Anthony dollar began life as an ambitious attempt to modernize American coinage, struggled to gain public acceptance, and eventually became an unexpectedly interesting collecting series in which a tiny mint mark change could separate an ordinary coin from a genuinely desirable numismatic variety. Next coin. 1979 D. Susan B. Anthony dollar is one of those coins that can appear almost too common to deserve serious attention, yet certain examples have become surprisingly important to collectors because the difference between an ordinary specimen and an exceptional one is found in details that are easy to miss. Denver struck hundreds of millions of these dollars during the first year of the new denomination, so the mere presence of the D mint mark does not make a coin rare. What makes the issue fascinating is the enormous gap between typical examples and the finest surviving pieces, along with the possibility of unusual mint errors that can transform an otherwise common date into a major numismatic discovery. As we move through the history of this coin, we will look at the characteristics collectors use to identify an authentic 1979D, the varieties and errors that actually matter, the grading factors that separate average pieces from elite examples, and what authenticated coins have brought in the marketplace. The most important lesson is that value is created by a combination of rarity, preservation, originality, authentication, and demand, not by the date alone. The story begins in an America that was changing rapidly. By 1979, inflation had become one of the defining economic problems of the decade. Energy prices were climbing during the second oil shock, and Americans were increasingly accustomed to vending machines, arcade equipment, transit systems, and other coin-operated devices. The Federal Reserve describes the period as part of the Great Inflation, a prolonged era of rising prices that eventually prompted Paul Volcker to adopt much more aggressive anti-inflation measures after becoming Federal Reserve Chairman in August 1979. The Iranian Revolution had also disrupted oil production and contributed to a sharp rise in energy prices, adding to the economic uncertainty of the period. Against that backdrop, the government was looking for a practical dollar coin that could serve modern machines and everyday transactions. The Susan B. Anthony dollar was intended to replace the much larger Eisenhower dollar with something considerably smaller and easier to handle. Treasury research had also suggested that a metal dollar could remain useful in circulation for many years compared with a paper dollar, making the concept economically attractive even though the public response would ultimately prove very different from what officials hoped. The coin itself represented a remarkable break with American numismatic tradition. Susan B. Anthony became the first real woman, rather than an allegorical or mythological female figure, to appear on a U.S. circulating coin. Her selection connected the new denomination directly to the long struggle for women's suffrage, and the coin arrived only a few years after the nation had celebrated the 1976 bicentennial. Frank Gasparro, the mint's chief engraver, created the design. On the obverse, Anthony faces right in a dignified profile, surrounded by liberty, in God we trust, 13 stars, and the date. The reverse features an American eagle descending toward the surface of the moon, an adaptation of the Apollo 11 mission insignia previously used on the Eisenhower dollar. That reverse was more than decorative recycling. It connected the new small dollar to one of the most celebrated technological achievements in American history. The denomination therefore brought together two very different national stories: the struggle for women's voting rights on the front and the triumph of the American space program on the back. The U.S. Mint identifies Gasparro as the sculptor and designer and confirms the Apollo-inspired reverse and Susan B. Anthony obverse. Now turn the coin over in your hand, and the physical specifications begin to tell another story. The 1979D Susan B. Anthony dollar is 26.5 millimeters in diameter and weighs 8.1 grams, with a reeded edge and a copper-nickel clad composition consisting of 75% copper and 25% nickel in the outer layers surrounding a pure copper core. This means the coin is not a silver dollar, despite the many mistaken descriptions that have circulated online over the years. The layered construction was selected for durability and familiar appearance rather than precious metal content. At the Denver Mint, the D Mint mark identifies the facility responsible for producing this enormous first-year output. A total of 288,015,744 regular strike 1979 D dollars were minted, placing the issue firmly in the category of abundant modern U.S. coinage rather than traditional rarity. That number is critical when evaluating a coin because it immediately eliminates one common misconception. A 1979 D is not valuable simply because it is an early Susan B. Anthony dollar. Millions upon millions were struck, distributed, stored, and eventually released, meaning that true rarity has to come from something beyond the basic date and mint mark. The Denver coins also entered a difficult marketplace. Their smaller size was intended to make the new dollar more convenient, but the resemblance to the quarter became a persistent problem. People could confuse the two denominations in ordinary transactions, while businesses had to decide whether machines should accept the new coin at all. The public was also already accustomed to the $1 Federal Reserve note, which was lightweight, familiar, and easy to carry. As a result, the Antony dollar never developed the broad, everyday acceptance that officials had envisioned. Yet that failed experiment created an unusual afterlife for the coin. Large numbers survived in government holdings, bank inventories, collections, rolls, and private accumulations rather than being worn down through decades of continuous circulation. Some examples therefore exist today with surprisingly fresh surfaces, although high-grade survival is very different from simple survival. A coin can be plentiful overall, while being genuinely difficult to find with the combination of strong strike, clean fields, excellent luster, minimal contact marks, and superior eye appeal required for the highest mint state grades. That distinction between population and condition rarity is one of the central ideas collectors must understand before assigning a premium to any 1979D. For an uncirculated 1979D, the examination becomes much more demanding as the grade rises. Collectors and professional graders study the open fields, Antony's cheek and neck, the hair, the lettering, the rim, the eagle, the lunar surface, and the overall sharpness of the strike. Bag marks and contact abrasions are especially important because these large coins could collide with one another during production, transportation, counting, and storage. A coin can retain attractive original mint luster while still carrying enough marks to limit its grade. At the lower mint state levels, such imperfections may be acceptable. At MS65, MS66, and especially MS67 or MS68, even relatively small distractions can become decisive. Susan B. Antony dollars are not normally assigned the familiar red, red-brown, or brown color designations used for copper cents, so collectors should not confuse natural surface color with a formal color classification. Instead, originality, luster, surface preservation, strike, and eye appeal dominate the assessment. The market demonstrates how dramatically condition can matter. PCGS records an auction result of $1,528 for a 1979D graded MS68 at Heritage Auctions in January 2017. That result belongs to an extraordinarily well-preserved certified coin, not to the typical 1979D found in a collection or received as change. There is another important trap surrounding this date. Collectors sometimes apply varieties to the 1979D that actually belong to other Susan B. Antony issues. The famous wide rim or near date distinction is associated with 1979 Philadelphia dollars, not with the Denver issue. All 1979D dollars are considered the normal narrow rim configuration, so seeing the date relatively close to the rim on a Denver coin does not create a recognized 1979D wide rim rarity. Likewise, the famous Filled S and Clear S mintmark varieties belong to the 1979 S-proof dollars, not the 1979D regular strikes. This is exactly why variety identification must begin with the correct mint and production format. On the 1979D, the major collecting opportunities are much more strongly tied to condition and genuine mint-made errors than to supposed special D mintmark variety. If a seller claims that a filled or unusual-looking Denver mintmark automatically creates a major rarity, skepticism is appropriate. A damaged, filled, polished, or photographed mintmark can look dramatic without representing a recognized die variety. Professional references and certified examples are far safer guides than online photographs accompanied by extraordinary asking prices. Errors, however, can completely change that equation when they are genuine. One particularly important documented example is a 1979D Susan B. Antony dollar struck over a 1978D Roosevelt dime. CoinWorld records an NGC-certified MS66 example of this dramatic overstrike that realized $11,750 in a heritage auction. That is an extraordinary result, but it must be placed in its proper context. This was not an ordinary 1979 dollar suddenly becoming an $11,000 coin. It was a spectacular, authenticated mint era involving an entirely different planchet or previously struck coin, and its rarity and visual evidence made it fundamentally different from the standard issue. For collectors searching through 1979 dollars, this distinction is essential. A genuine error should show physical evidence consistent with the minting process, such as an abnormal planchet, dramatic off-center strike, multiple striking, clipped planchet, or another verifiable production anomaly. Scratches, gouges, dents, flattened rims, machine damage, altered surfaces, or post-mint modifications are not automatically errors. The stronger the claimed value, the stronger the evidence should be, and major errors should be professionally authenticated before any serious valuation is attempted. That brings the examination down to the coin sitting directly in front of you. Begin with the basic measurements rather than the price. An authentic 1979 should conform closely to its established specifications, including its 8.1 gram weight, 26.5 millimeter diameter, reeded edge, and copper-nickel clad construction over a copper core. Look carefully at the edge for anything inconsistent with normal production, but do not damage the coin trying to prove what it is made from. A good magnifier can reveal suspicious lettering, altered surfaces, tool marks, unusual die characteristics, or evidence that a supposed error is actually damage. If the coin appears unusually sharp, exceptionally clean, or physically different from ordinary examples, compare it with trusted reference images, and when the potential premium justifies it, submit it to a respected third-party grading service. Authentication is especially important because counterfeiters and altered coin sellers can take advantage of collectors who focus on a single exciting feature while ignoring the entire coin. Never clean a potentially valuable specimen. Abrasive polishing can permanently remove original surfaces, while improper chemicals can change the appearance and reduce collector desirability. For preservation, use a quality inert holder. Keep the coin away from PVC-containing materials and harsh chemicals, and store it in a stable environment with controlled humidity and minimal handling. Once all of those pieces are assembled, the market becomes easier to understand. An ordinary circulated 1979 usually remains a denomination-level collectible rather than a major rarity, and even many uncirculated examples are inexpensive because supply is large. But an unusually attractive certified coin can enter a very different market. Depending on grade, certification, strike, surface quality, eye appeal, and the strength of current bidding, a hypothetical elite but non-error example might attract four-figure attention, perhaps around $1,180 or $2,340, while a truly exceptional certified specimen could command considerably more. Those figures are illustrations of how condition-based premiums can develop, not guaranteed values for every coin. The documented MS-68 auction result of $1,528 provides a real reference point, while the certified MS-66 overstruck-on-dime error demonstrates how dramatically a genuine mint mistake can change the equation. At the same time, recent market evidence includes ordinary certified MS-67 examples selling for only modest amounts, reinforcing the central lesson that a numerical grade by itself does not make every coin rare. The 1979 therefore occupies an intriguing place in American numismatics, historically important but abundantly produced, familiar to the public but frequently misunderstood, and usually inexpensive in ordinary condition, yet capable of becoming highly desirable when exceptional preservation or authentic mint era rarity enters the picture. Its long-term collectability comes from that tension. It represents a major experiment in American coinage, carries the portrait of a pivotal figure in the history of women's suffrage, connects its reverse to the Apollo era, and provides collectors with a clear lesson in how modern coins become rare, not because millions were never made, but because very few survive with exactly the characteristics that specialists are willing to compete for. Next coin. There is something deceptively quiet about a 1979 Susan B. Anthony dollar. Millions were struck at the Philadelphia Mint, and many examples can still be found today looking almost exactly as they did when they left the mint. Yet experienced collectors know that the surface of this coin can conceal a much more interesting story. The first thing to understand is that the 1979p is not automatically rare, and its age alone does not make it expensive. The real investigation begins with details that can be seen around Susan B. Anthony's portrait, especially the position of the date relative to the rim, the quality of the strike, the preservation of the surfaces, and whether the coin belongs to a recognized variety or represents a genuine mint era. Later, we will examine authenticated auction results and see why one 1979p can remain close to its face value while another, carrying the same date and mint mark, can attract serious competition. The objective is not to assume that every coin is valuable, but to learn how collectors distinguish an ordinary survivor from a genuinely desirable piece. To understand why Philadelphia produced so many of these dollars in the first place, we have to step into the economic and political atmosphere of 1979. America was experiencing the painful effects of inflation. Energy prices were rising sharply during the second oil crisis, and the country was searching for ways to make its currency system more practical and efficient. The Susan B. Anthony dollar was the government's attempt to create a smaller, lighter alternative to the enormous Eisenhower dollar. It was authorized by Public Law 95-447 and represented an important moment in American coinage, because Susan B. Anthony became the first non-mythical woman to appear on a U.S. circulating coin. Her portrait was intended to honor her decades of activism for women's suffrage, while the new denomination was also supposed to work more effectively with vending machines and other coin-operated equipment. But the experiment encountered an immediate problem. The new dollar was only slightly larger than a quarter, and many people found the two coins too similar in everyday use. At the same time, Americans already had a familiar $1 Federal Reserve note in their wallets. The result was a coin that the government produced in enormous numbers, but that the public never fully embraced. The U.S. Mint confirms that the Susan B. Anthony dollar replaced the Eisenhower dollar and was issued from 1979 through 1981 before returning briefly in 1999. Now look closely at the design, because the artwork itself provides a remarkable connection between two very different chapters of American history. Frank Gasparro, the Mint's chief engraver, created the Susan B. Anthony portrait used on the obverse. She faces right, surrounded by liberty, in God We Trust, 13 stars, and the date. The reverse carries an American eagle descending toward the lunar surface, a design adapted from the Apollo 11 insignia that had already appeared on the Eisenhower dollar. The eagle carries an olive branch, a traditional American symbol of peace, while the Earth appears above the lunar landscape, connecting the coin to the nation's extraordinary achievement in space exploration. Around the design are United States of America, EPLUBUSUNUM, $1, and 13 stars. Gasparro's initials, FG, appear on the reverse beneath the eagle's tail feathers. The coin therefore tells a story from both sides. Anthony represents the struggle for equality and voting rights, while the reverse preserves the memory of America's journey to the moon. For a collector, these details are not simply decorative. They provide reference points for examining strike sharpness, die characteristics, lettering, and possible alterations, which becomes increasingly important when a coin's condition is good enough to justify professional certification. Before considering rarity, an experienced numismatist establishes exactly what the object is. The 1979p Susan B. Anthony dollar measures 26.5 millimeters in diameter, weighs 8.1 grams, and has a reeded edge. Its outer layers are composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel surrounding a pure copper center, so despite its silvery appearance, this is not a silver dollar. The P mint mark identifies Philadelphia, although its position is not on the reverse. It appears on the obverse near Anthony's right shoulder. The mint's production process began with clad strip and planchets prepared to the required specifications, followed by upsetting and striking between dies under substantial pressure. The finished coins were then counted, packaged, transporting, and distributed through the monetary system. Philadelphia produced 360,222,000 regular strike examples in 1979, making this the most heavily produced Susan B. Anthony dollar of the first year. That enormous mintage changes the entire value equation. If you discover a 1979 P, you are not beginning with a rare coin, you are beginning with a common coin that must prove why it deserves special attention. The physical specifications also give collectors a useful first line of defense against suspicious pieces. An unexplained weight difference, an abnormal diameter, an improperly formed edge, or construction inconsistent with copper-nickel-clad coinage should prompt further investigation rather than an immediate valuation. The next clue is the feature that made the 1979 P famous among Susan B. Anthony specialists: the relationship between the date and the rim. Most 1979 P dollars are the narrow rim or far date variety, in which the date sits noticeably farther from the rim. A second major variety, known as the wide rim or near date, places the date significantly closer to the rim. The important point is that the total reported mintage of 360,222,000 includes both configurations. The Mint did not publish a separate official mintage figure for the wide rim variety, so claims giving an exact production number should be treated cautiously. The wide rim is a legitimate recognized variety, not damage, and not a fantasy designation. PCGS catalogs the 1979 P wide rim separately and also recognizes a specific FS301 die variety within that category. To examine it properly, do not rely on an online photograph that may be distorted by perspective. Place the coin under even lighting and compare the spacing between the bottom of the date and the surrounding rim. The difference can be surprisingly obvious once you have seen authenticated examples side by side. But identification is only the beginning. A wide rim in circulated condition is not automatically a four-figure coin, and a common narrow rim in exceptional condition can still attract attention. Variety and grade must be evaluated together. Condition is where the investigation becomes much more demanding. A 1979 P that has never circulated may retain brilliant original mint luster, but that does not mean it automatically deserves a high mint state grade. Large numbers of these dollars were handled in bags, and contact between coins could leave abrasions across Anthony's portrait and the broad fields. Collectors examine the cheek, neck, hair, open areas around the portrait, lettering, rim, eagle, lunar surface, and overall sharpness. A strong strike gives the design crisp definition, while weakness in certain areas can limit the visual quality even when the surfaces are otherwise attractive. At MS60 through MS63, numerous contact marks can be acceptable. As the coin approaches MS65, MS66, and the very finest levels, small marks become increasingly important. Luster should appear natural rather than artificially brightened, and a cleaned coin may lose much of the originality collectors seek even if it looks shiny under a lamp. Susan B. Anthony dollars are not normally assigned the red-brown, or brown color designations associated with copper Lincoln cents, so color here is primarily a matter of natural toning and eye appeal rather than a formal color grade. Population reports can also be misunderstood. The number of coins certified does not equal the number surviving in existence, and a high population at one grade does not necessarily mean that every example is equally attractive. PCGS currently records an MS68 designation for the regular 1979 P and documents an auction record of $3,819 for an MS65 example sold by Heritage Auctions in January 2014, illustrating how unusual market outcomes can occur without implying that ordinary examples carry anything close to that level. At this point, the coin's potential value starts to become clearer because the market separates several different categories of rarity. A typical circulated 1979 P remains a common modern dollar, and even many raw uncirculated pieces have only a modest premium. Current dealer listings and auction activity show why collectors should not confuse an advertised asking price with a verified transaction. For example, a certified MS65 regular 1979 P has recently been offered around the low double-digit range, while the PCGS auction record for a regular strike specimen reached $3,819 under particular circumstances. That enormous spread is not contradictory. It reflects differences in grade, certification, eye appeal, scarcity at the highest quality levels, and the circumstances of individual sales. For a genuinely exceptional certified coin, a collector might encounter a market outcome around $1,460, $2,275, or, in an especially competitive situation, considerably more. Those are not guaranteed valuations and should never be applied simply because a coin appears shiny. They illustrate why the professional market can reward a combination of characteristics that is much harder to find than the raw mintage figure suggests. The wide rim variety creates another layer of collector interest. PCGS records a $6,995 auction result for an NGC MS67 Plus wide rim sold through eBay in December 2021, but PCGS explicitly notes that it is not responsible for the accuracy or authenticity of eBay listings. That result should therefore be treated as an exceptional reported transaction rather than a universal benchmark. The most exciting discoveries, however, are not always varieties. Sometimes they are mistakes made during the manufacturing process. A legitimate mint error occurs when something goes wrong before the coin leaves the mint, and the physical evidence must be consistent with that production process. The 1979 P series has documented examples of significant errors, including a narrow rim dollar struck on a quarter blank. Heritage Auctions records an NGC-certified MS64 example of that error, weighing 5.7 grams rather than the normal 8.1 grams, that sold for $492 on March 31, 2025. That is a particularly useful case study because it demonstrates both the power and the limits of error collecting. The coin is genuinely unusual, professionally certified, and visually distinguishable from a normal Susan B. Anthony dollar, but the verified result was hundreds of dollars rather than an automatically enormous fortune. Other apparent abnormalities must be approached carefully. A flattened edge may result from damage, a strange mark may be a postmint scratch, and an unusual-looking rim can be caused by circulation or machine damage rather than a striking error. This is why experienced collectors inspect both sides, examine the edge, weigh the coin accurately, compare the design with known references, and seek certification before assigning a major premium. A genuine error should tell a coherent manufacturing story. If the supposed error only tells a story after someone has written a description around it, caution is warranted. Authentication also protects the collector from another modern problem: altered and misrepresented coins. Because the 1979 P wide rim is easy to identify once you know the diagnostic, it has also become an attractive subject for exaggerated online listings. Some sellers use the phrase "rare 1979 P" without distinguishing between the ordinary narrow rim and the recognized wide rim variety, while others confuse condition rarity with absolute rarity. A collector examining a suspected premium coin should first verify the date, mint mark, rim-to-date relationship, weight, diameter, edge, and surface originality. Magnification can help reveal tooling, polishing, suspicious scratches, unnatural color, or altered lettering, but magnification alone cannot establish authenticity. Do not clean the coin to make the details easier to see. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and may sharply reduce collector appeal. If a coin appears to be a high-grade wide rim, a major error, or an unusually pristine regular strike, professional grading can provide an independent assessment of authenticity and condition. For long-term storage, an inert holder designed for numismatic material is preferable to loose plastic, cardboard with harmful adhesives, or PVC-containing flips. Keep the coin away from excessive humidity, chemicals, heat, and repeated handling. Hold it by the edges when examination is necessary, because fingerprints contain oils and salts that can leave permanent marks on an otherwise pristine surface. The final question is not simply whether 1979 P Susan B. Anthony dollar is valuable, but why one example can command the attention of specialists while another remains almost indistinguishable from face value. The answer lies in the interaction of history, variety, preservation, and scarcity at the exact level collectors are pursuing. A normal circulated coin can be common despite being nearly 50 years old. A clean uncirculated specimen may carry a modest premium. A certified high-grade example can become considerably more desirable because truly exceptional surfaces are harder to locate than the original mintage suggests. A recognized wide rim can attract a separate group of variety collectors, while an authenticated error can move into an entirely different category. A verified result around $1,735 might make sense for a particularly desirable certified coin under favorable market conditions, while another example with the same date could sell for only a small premium if its surfaces are average. The documented $3,819 regular strike auction record and the separately reported $6,995 wide rim result demonstrate the upper reaches of specific certified examples, but neither number should ever be treated as the value of every 1979 $. What makes this coin historically important is that it captures an ambitious experiment in American money, a smaller dollar designed for modern commerce, honoring a pioneering woman and carrying an image born from the Apollo era. What makes it numismatically interesting is even more subtle. Hundreds of millions were produced, yet collectors can still spend considerable time searching for the right rim configuration, the right strike, the right surfaces, the right certification, or the right mint-made mistake. That is the real investigation behind the 1979 Susan B. Anthony dollar, not finding a magical date, but learning to recognize the rare combination of characteristics that the market has proven willing to reward.